So in this video I'm going to be going through and talking about all 12 games featured on the Capcom Edition of the Super Pocket device. If you don't know what the Super Pocket is, check out my previous video where I talk about that very same thing. There are various different versions of the Super Pocket. There's a Capcom, a Taito, a Technos and an Atari version. The Capcom version is the one I've got, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. The actual sort of in-depth review of the Super Pocket was on the previous video. On this I'm purely just going to be talking about the games. So, let's take a look. So I think we can talk about the first two games together, really. So 1942 and 1943, the Battle of Midway. So the 1980s was the golden era for arcade shoot-'em-up games, where players engaged in non-stop blasting, dodging, weaving and diving. And whilst most of the games featured sci-fi themes, Capcom enjoyed significant success with its series of World War II themed shooters. These games all featured you piloting a fighter plane over the Pacific Islands and shooting down bombers and other aerial threats. A highlight was the emergency dodge maneuver, which allowed your plane to execute a satisfying loop-the-loop whilst dive-bombing enemies with extensive firepower. Admit it, you often perform that move simply because it just looked impressive. Now, these two arcade games, released in 1984 and 1987 respectively, did originally feature a long, thin screen when it was on the arcade machine. This isn't quite as effective on the smaller screen of the Super Pocket. Although you can stretch the display in the settings, it doesn't appear very good like this either. One would expect this to have been considered when they were piling these games together for the Super Pocket. Now, additionally, there are 3 games on the Super Pocket that are quite similar, and you're going to be more likely to play only 1944 The Loop Master anyway, since that game is on full screen. The small screen was workable on the original arcade, but it's less practical on the Super Pocket, especially when trying to dodge bullets. It is unfortunate because both games are very enjoyable under normal circumstances. But never mind, let's go on to the next game, Bionic Commando, also released in 1987 by Capcom, and this stands as a unique entry in the genre of action platformers, as this does away with the usual jump button mechanic for an original grappling hook system, allowing players to swing across gaps, climb to new heights and navigate obstacles with an almost acrobatic finesse. This is the game's standout feature, as it requires both precision and timing, adding a layer of complexity and satisfaction when mastered. This innovation set Bionic Commando apart from other platforms of its era, offering a fresh and exhilarating gameplay experience. However, the game is not without its challenges. The learning curve for the grappling system can be steep, and players may find themselves frustrated as they try and get used to the controls. That first level in particular is horribly frustrating to play through, and it actually gets easier to play after that, providing a tough but rewarding challenge for those determined to see the game through to its conclusion. It is a testament of Capcom's creativity and willingness to push the boundaries of game design, and although it's not my favourite title in this collection, it's still a memorable game in the annals of arcade history. The next game is Mega Man, also released in 1987, and the inclusion of the game on this cartridge is rather unexpected, as it's the original NES version, which is perfectly fine, but one might have expected an arcade-themed collection to have included one of the Mega Man arcade games instead. Nonetheless, this game holds historical significance as it's Capcom's very first title designed specifically for home consoles. As a side-scrolling action platformer noted for its high difficulty level, Mega Man allows players to tackle its initial 6 levels in any order, with the final stage where Dr. Wily awaits only being made available after all the others have been completed. Although Mega Man was not an immediate blockbuster for Capcom, the character and gameplay garnered enough confidence to justify multiple subsequent sequels, and the rest is history. As someone who grew up with a Mega Drive in the 1990s, I didn't really play this game, so it doesn't hold any nostalgic value for me. It's another title that can become exceptionally frustrating and challenging, but once you get accustomed to it, you can start making progress. I've observed considerable screen flickering when there's too much happening simultaneously. However, this issue was common in the original game and many other NES titles, so it's not related to the Super Pocket. Nonetheless, the ability to use save states on this device allow for greater progress than what you may have been able to achieve previously. Save states certainly come in handy for this next game as well. Ghouls N Ghosts, released in 1988. Now, whilst the challenging nature of this game makes it feel almost like a homegrown game, like Mega Man, and indeed they were some impressive conversions of this title to the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo with Super Ghouls N Ghosts, its exceptional quality is still indisputable. It might not be Capcom's most celebrated sequel, that honour undoubtedly belongs to the almighty Street Fighter II, but it's certainly amongst the top. This iteration improves on every aspect of the previous game, Ghosts and Goblins, providing numerous quality of life enhancements without diluting its rigorous difficulty. Ghouls N Ghosts still remains a formidable challenge to conquer even to this day, although again, playing this on the Super Pocket does give you the added convenience of not only having those save states, but also being able to press the select button to insert additional virtual coins, allowing you to continue the adventure and continue to inevitably getting killed in horrible ways. Another popular arcade release from 1988 was Forgotten Worlds, and I thoroughly enjoyed playing this in the arcades back in the day, and it was truly disappointing that the game never really received a home port that captured its essence. In the arcade setting, it was remarkable, serving as the spiritual successor to Capcom's earlier game Sidearms. This twin-stick shooter featured exceptional graphics and music for its era. It also featured two of the most utterly kick-ass and chew bubblegum heroes that you can possibly find in a good old-fashioned late 80s arcade game. Forgotten Worlds was also the first CPS-1 arcade game, and Capcom made a strong start with using this board. Outside the arcade, the equivalent dual-stick experience wasn't available at home until it was included in the Capcom Classics collection on the PS2. However, playing this on the Super Pocket has some challenges. With the absence of having two joysticks, you instead need to use the shoulder buttons to aim and shoot, which may take some adjustment due to their placement. Additionally, two-player mode is not possible, which was a massive part of the arcade game's appeal. I do mention the button placement on the previous Super Pocket video. I mean, I can think of worse places they could have put the shoulder buttons. I mean, if you'd have put them up top, they would have got in the way of inserting a cartridge when you're trying to put evercade cartridges in. The buttons on the back could have been better, but yeah, they just take a bit of getting used to. Nevertheless, this remains a delightfly outrageous and extravagant arcade shooter that exudes 1980s vibes. Next up is Strider from 1989, another game revered as a classic, cherished by many gamers. Although much of its acclaim actually stems from the exceptional Mega Drive version, which very closely mirrored the arcade experience. Strider represents the epitome of classic action gaming from the days before open world freedom. It encapsulates everything an action-packed platformer should be. It's filled to the brim with set pieces, and it's swarming with enemies. It's a game designed for fast-paced play, encouraging players to charge forward, slashing away with their ninja sword, and watching foes explode and fall at their feet. Even today, there should be more games like Strider, a title that remains nearly perfect, with no subsequent Strider games even coming close to matching the original's greatness. It is fantastic. Also from 1989 is one of my all-time personal, most favourite games of all time, Final Fight. A game that has a way of repeatedly making its appearance in my games collection. It was one of my first arcade games to play at the seaside with my dad, despite the fact that he always chose Mike Hagger and occasionally ended up pile driving my character by accident. So when I had the chance to play this at home, well, there was no way I would let this slip away. I initially purchased it for the Sega Mega CD, which was literally the only reason for me wanting to buy a second-hand Mega CD in the first place. I also previously acquired it on PlayStation 2 through the Capcom Classics collection, on the Xbox with Final Fight Double Impact, on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, and I've played it on the Game Boy Advance amongst other platforms, and I even owned this on the Commodore 64, which was a terrible conversion, and I've never quite forgiven US Gold for that. Now I've added it again to my collection with the Super Pocket Edition, and understandably so. I mean, why wouldn't I? This is the beat-em-up that revolutionised the genre and heightened its popularity for several years. Even today, it remains exceptionally impressive, with few beat-em-ups matching its level of satisfaction, offering a variety of moves from uppercuts to pile drivers, and featuring a memorable cast of characters who would later appear in other Capcom games. It rightfully holds its place as a classic of its time, and I never get tired of playing this.
And the American dream lives on in Minnesota as we shock the world!
And whilst the notion of a heavily muscled bodybuilder or professional wrestler becoming the mayor of a major US city once seemed absurd, it has indeed occurred in real life, with figures like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jesse the Body Ventura, and Glenn Kane Jacobs entering politics. You don't really tend to see that happening over here in the United Kingdom. I mean, why didn't Boris Johnson tackle crime in London during his tenure as mayor by taking his shirt off and body slamming a few shoplifters? You missed a trick there, Bojo. Next up is Mercs, released in 1990. As an excellent sequel to the classic Commando, it exemplifies the top-down run-and-gun genre. This game combines intense foot-based action with various vehicles and turrets that the player can operate. Players can collect numerous weapons along their journey, and the smart bomb move known as the Mega Crash is available for any tight situations. The game becomes much harder in later stages, but the first and maybe even the second stage can be easily cleared on a single credit. Of course, again, on the Super Pocket, you can keep pressing the select button to add more virtual coins and just keep continuing. However, Mercs does face the same issues as 1942 and 1943, where the arcade's original long, thin screen doesn't translate too well to the Super Pocket. Again, you can stretch the screen, but that's not really how the games were meant to be played. Again, this is something that you would have thought should have been considered while compiling the games together for this collection, but nonetheless, Mercs is still a fantastic and exaggerated 1980s arcade game to enjoy on the move. Next up is Capcom Commando from 1991. Now, I would have been perfectly satisfied with a collection exclusively featuring Capcom scrolling arcade beat-em-ups, very much like the Capcom beat-em-up bundle, as long as it included two games in particular, Final Fight and Capcom Commando. The latter is one of Capcom's more whimsical beat-em-up titles and stands out as one of the premier early CPS-1 arcade games in the genre. Players can choose to embody a ninja, a mummy, or an exceptionally intelligent baby operating a mech. It's an absolutely cracking game with a wicked sense of humour and some unique looking characters and locations. Whilst Capcom arguably refined these beat-em-up concepts in some of their later releases, this game remains well crafted and again is amongst my personal favourites. Then we come on to the big one. Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting. Now, back in 1992, Street Fighter II was the undisputed king of the arcades, always drawing in the biggest crowds. The original version of the game, Street Fighter II The World Warrior, featured 4 mysterious bosses that only skilled players or onlookers could see. The first time I saw these guys was actually in a UK gaming magazine, Bad Influence, which was based off the television series that was on at the time. Seeing these 4 grandmasters for the first time in the pages of this magazine gave them like a sense of mystery, and rumours of their special moves and powers were the talk of the school playground. And to be honest, I do miss the mystique that video game bosses like these once had. Naturally, once these bosses were discovered, players wanted to try them out for themselves, leading to the creation of several unofficial bootleg versions like Street Fighter II Black Belt Edition, Street Fighter II Rainbow Edition, etc, etc. These versions featured increased speed, the ability to perform special moves mid-air, and even the option to switch characters during a fight, including switching to some of the bosses. In response, Capcom released what was essentially their own official bootleg. This allowed for increased speed, enabled players to choose the bosses, and even permitted both players to select the same character. In my opinion though, hyper fighting moves just a little bit too quickly, and it's not my favourite version. In fact, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo seemed to manage the increased speed much better than what this version did. Nevertheless, it's still Street Fighter 2 and no one's going to turn it down. It's certainly not going to rank at the bottom or anything like that. I would have preferred the Champion Edition myself over this because hyperfighting can be extremely challenging and is likely one of the toughest versions of Street Fighter 2 available on these devices, despite the easy option that the Super Pocket offers. Also, you miss out on the two-player mode, which was a big part of the original game's appeal. The game also uses these shoulder buttons on the back, which can be tricky to get adjusted to when executing fireballs and dragon punches. Still, it's Street Fighter 2, and no Capcom game collection would be complete without including at least one Street Fighter title.
You win.
And lastly, we have 1944 The Loop Master, their most recent game on this collection, released in the year 2000. It's another title from Capcom's World War II shoot-'em-up series. 1944 The Loop Master is an entry that's been revitalized with fresh visuals, kick-ass music, and even bigger explosions and bosses from the previous games. And it just stands out as a fantastic addition to the series. It's actually my favourite in the 1940X series. It feels significantly more modern for its era and possesses a subtle charm, and whilst it might not be as renowned as previous titles like 1943, all I can say is if you haven't played this one yet, it is certainly worth your time. So, I'm sure you'll agree, that was an excellent selection of games. Of course, it's easy to turn around and say that, oh, this title should have been included, or why wasn't this game put in? Personally, you've probably gathered I love my scrolling beat-em-ups. I would have loved to have seen Alien vs Predator, The Punisher, and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs featured in this collection, but given their attached licenses, that was always going to be a tad unlikely. Despite these omissions, this remains an exceptional game collection. Again, I've got to question the inclusion of having three very similar games, as well as titles that were obviously originally designed for much smaller screens, which don't translate too well to the then even smaller screen of the Super Pocket. But nevertheless, there's still plenty here to enjoy and keep you engaged for a long time until you consider purchasing some of those rather fancy looking evercade cartridges. On that note, my next evercade Super Pocket themed video will showcase even more handheld arcade experiences as I explore the Data East Arcade 1 collection. So do be sure to come back to the channel for that. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed this particular video, then please do leave a like and a comment, and do be sure to check out some of my other videos. Consider sharing this video on your social media, especially with those interested in retro gaming and the evercade community, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell in order to see future videos just like this one. Thank you very much for visiting the Big Daddy D Reviews channel, and I'll see you again next time.